Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be ranking every single NHL team's entire prospect pool after the 2022 NHL draft. Now a lot has changed after the 2022 draft for almost every single NHL team, but as it stands right now in July, who has the best and who has the worst prospect pools across the league, and where does your favorite NHL team rank across the NHL? Watch till the end for all the prospect talk and all the rankings. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like prospect content, this channel is the place to be. But let's start out today's ranking with the worst prospect pool in the NHL, and I would say usually there's a much bigger difference between 31 and 32, but at the same time, the bottom five really this year is pretty even, but still, for the worst prospect pool, I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Penguins. At 32nd overall, to me, really the biggest problem is the depth. You have some guys that I still like Savoie Poulin, even if they haven't taken that next step. Joel Blomqvist is looking pretty good in net. Tristan Barras is okay, and I do like the Owen Pickering pick, but besides that, there's not really a lot of depth, especially in the forward side of things, for me to really put this Penguins team not in last place. They have some decent chips, but really nothing that excites you truly. But let's go on to number 31 and the next team here, and to me, again, it's razor thin between these two teams, but next up, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, the Lightning might have been 32nd if it weren't for this last draft. Getting Isaac Howard and Lucas Edmonds, I think, are two big pickups for that forward group, and especially Isaac Howard, I think, has the best potential out of any prospect they have right now. But you also combine other players like Dylan Duke, who I like quite a bit. Roman Schmidt could be something. You also got in the 2019 or 2020 draft Jack Finley. You got guys like Jack Thompson, Eamon Powell, who I think could also be solid players. So for the Lightning, it's a lot more depth, not a lot of amazing players, but I think Isaac Howard will be the big one in that pool. Next up, going on to number 30, and again, this is where I think the prospect pools start to separate themselves just a little bit. At number 30, I'm going to go with the St. Louis Blues. Now, it's kind of like the Tampa Bay Lightning, or I guess maybe the Pittsburgh Penguins, where they have a lot of solid prospects. Nothing that is absolutely amazing, though. I do like Jake Neighbors still, and he still technically counts as a prospect. You also got players like Zachary Bolduc, Jimmy Snuggerud of this last draft. Forward-wise, I think the Blues are pretty solid, but besides that, I feel like it's also pretty thin. Next up, going on to number 29, and a team that's trying to make their prospect pool as bad as humanly possible in the Colorado Avalanche. Now, the thing is, they've traded a bunch of their picks, they traded a bunch of their prospects, and it eventually worked out in the end, winning the Stanley Cup, but their prospect pool is suffering for it. Obviously, we saw the Justin Barron trade, and having Bowen Byram and Alex Newhook graduate doesn't really help things. You still got solid prospects like Oscar Olesen, I do like Jean-Luc Foudy, but at the same time, this as prospect pool went from solid to a lot more thin and a lot less depth over the year. Now going on to number 28 though. Next I'm going to go to a team that I'm kind of on the fence about when it comes to their prospect pool, and the New York Islanders. Now even though I've seen them having a couple of great steals over the past couple of years, they still are lacking just a little bit in terms of that top end talent. I do still love Aatu Ratu at 52, and of course you got Calle Odiolus and Isaiah George, two favorites of mine, steals by the Islanders in this last draft, but at the same time I think they definitely could use a top 15 caliber player in this prospect pool, but at the same time, I do think they have solid depth in almost every single position, just nothing that stands out, but Odiolus, George, and Radu are going to be great at their positions. Now going on to number 27, next up, I'm going to go to a team that's kind of risen a little bit over the last couple of years in the Boston Bruins. Now, I think for the Bruins, one of the main reasons why they're still in this spot and a little bit higher than usual is because many of their guys really haven't graduated. You still got Mason Lowry in that prospect pool, you still got guys like Fabian Liesel, Brett Harrison, and of course this last year adding guys like Cole Spicer, Matthew Portrays, and there's quite a bit of forward end prospects on this pool. Nothing that's going to really push the needle for the future, but a lot of guys that will be NHL players. Next up at number 26, we're going to go to a little bit of a controversial one in my opinion in the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I was kind of thinking going in that we could have the Canucks maybe a little bit lower, but I think this last draft did save their prospect pool quite a bit. Jonathan Lekkerimaki at 15 and Elias Pettersson at 80 are two brilliant adds to both that forward and defensive side of the prospect pool, but besides that, Danila Klimovich could be something. Yanni Yermo is going to be interesting. Jacob Truscott has taken some big steps. But overall, with this prospect pool. There's still a lot of rawness, but I do think this last draft, especially with Lekkerimaki at 15, makes it a lot higher than what it would have been. Next up, let's go on to number 25, and I'm going to go on to a team that's had some graduates recently in the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, they still got Brendan Brisson, they still got guys like Lucas Cormier, Zach Dean, Daniil Chayka in the last couple of drafts, also adding players like Jordan Gustafsson and Matthias Sapovaliv, who have some good potential in the system. Again, I think besides Brisson, there's nothing that's absolutely amazing, but I feel like this Golden Knights youthful core, there is quite a few guys will take that next step this next year. Brisson could be one of those players, and I think for the Golden Knights, although the future isn't amazing, you still have guys that could fill into solid role positions. Now going on to number 24 though, and a team that I gotta be honest has risen quite a bit from the last ranking in the Washington Capitals for me. Now, here's the thing, Connor McMichael graduating does hurt the prospect pool, but I think these past couple of drafts have really been solid for them. They've still got Henrik Lapierre in that system, you still got Vince Iorio, Brent Johnson in the 2021 draft, and this last draft, getting Miroschnichenko at 20 adds some big talent value, and also Ryan Chesley at 37. Honestly, I think the defensive prospect pool, that side of things, is pretty underrated with Oreo Johnson and Chesley leading the way. So overall for the Cavs, I would say it's the strongest defensive core that we've seen prospect-wise in this list so far. But now going on to number 23, I'm going to go to a team that's gotten a little bit more thin over the past couple of years in the Edmonton Oilers. Now, they still have some great guys. Dylan Holloway's still there. Carter Savoie is making big progress. Xavier Bourgault was great in the QMJHL this last year. Luka Munzenberger is going to be an interesting project. And of course, in 2021, they also got Matvei Petrov. And in this last draft, Reed Schaefer at 32nd, I think is going to be just a solid third line forward. There is a good mix of just pure talents and guys that are going to be compactful NHL players. At the same time, though, the Oilers still have gotten a little bit more thin, and we have seen a couple of graduates recently. But I still think at number 23, the prospect pool is quite decent. Now going on to number 22, I'm going to move on to another pretty big drop, in my opinion, in the Florida Panthers. Now, this is another team that's kind of been suffering because of graduates. Anton Lundell was the big one this last year, playing great in his first full NHL season. Also, Spencer Knight, I'm just considering a prospect, just barely, for the sake of the Panthers prospect pool. But you also got solid guys like Mackie Samoskevich who are going to be solid. Evan Nyes, I'm pretty convinced about. You got other players as well, like Justin Sordoff, who could be interesting. And I feel like the problem with this Panthers draft and in this prospect pool right now is just how lackluster that 2022 draft was. So for me, they're dropping quite a bit. But still, I mean, 22 is pretty respectable for one of the best teams in the NHL. Next up at number 21, let's go on to one of the newest NHL franchises and the newest one in the Seattle Kraken. Now, they've jumped as well quite a bit. Last time I had them 31st in the rankings, but I feel like this last draft really put them over the top in a lot of different ways. Obviously, Matty Beniers is leading the way for me, but you bring in Shane Wright, Jagger Firkus, Yanni Nyman, you got Ryan Winterton, who's played solid since he was drafted, and a lot of great forward prospects on top of guys like David Goyette, who I think are going to be great high-ceiling guys. You also have on that defense Riker Evans, Ty Nelson, and to me, there's some solid depth there. About as good as depth as you can get for an expansion team, but still, especially that high-end talent with Wright, Firkus, and Beniers, I think the Kraken are starting off that forward side of the franchise really well. Now, really at this spot in the rankings is where the team starts getting to amazing territory. I mean, especially at the 20 range, you think, oh, the prospect pool number 20 isn't going to be that great. But really at number 20, it's where we start to get into some fantastic futures. Next up at number 20, I have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, to me, the Leafs prospect pool is really carried by a few different guys. You, of course, got Matthew Nyes, who took a huge last step after this season, or after last season, and went to the NCAA and was fantastic. You also got Tommy Nemula, who I'm absolutely in love with since he was drafted. Rodion Amir, I'm still a big fan of. Roddy Hervinen is up there as well. But I do feel like this last draft was just a little bit disappointing. Trading down and getting Fraser Minton 38 was a little bit of a questionable one for me. I mean, I still think Minton is a smart player, but that high, especially if the Leafs were confirmed to have him inside the top 15, was a little bit weird to me. But at the same time, I still think the Leafs are really solid overall. They got some good depth, some good high-end talent, and just a good prospect pool overall. Next up at number 19, we're going to go to another team that's kind of gone down in the rankings quite a bit, but I still think has a pretty solid pool in the New York Rangers. Now, here's the thing. I think in a lot of different ways, a prospect pool getting worse is kind of a good thing, especially for the Rangers, since so many guys have graduated and have taken that next step to the NHL level. For the big one this last year, it was Braden Schneider, who really took that next step in the second half and in the playoffs for the New York Rangers. I think he's officially graduated, and that is a big loss for this Rangers prospect pool, but they did add Adam Sekura and Bryce McDonald-Barker as the two big forwards, I think, in this last draft, and got Brendan Oppman taking that that next step. We'll see what Wright or Korczak becomes. That could be interesting. And you still got developing guys like Will Cooley in the system. Overall, for the Rangers, it's not an amazing prospect pool like it once was, but it still holds its weight quite a bit. Next up at number 18, though, kind of the same thing as the New York Rangers. Another team that's fallen quite a bit for me in the Calgary Flames. Now, the Flames have had some weird, interesting picks. I mean, this 2022 draft was barely anything, and they selected Tapi Ronnie, 59th overall, which I think was quite a bit high. But I still think you've got quite a bit of guys that haven't yet graduated that are still developing, like Matt Coronado, William Strongman. I'm a big fan of Cole Huckins there, Connor Zary in the 2020 draft, Jacob Pellichet. There's a lot of different guys there that, especially on forward, will carry the load and will do great on offense. I think for the Flames, that forward side of things is really what puts them ahead and inside the top 20 still. Next up, though, let's go on to a team that's officially pretty much on the rebuild in the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, they are just at number 17, but I would say for the most part, it's just because of them fully going into this rebuilding mode now, and that's why they're still in this range. They could be higher if they did that instead in 2021 like they probably should have, but at the same time, they still got a lot of different prospects from the system. Lucas Reichel is still considered as a prospect from 2020. We got Drew Comesso, Landon Slager, Wyatt Kaiser from that draft as well. Nolan Allen, I'm not the biggest fan of, but Colton Dawkins in the second round is solid. And then this last year, Kevin Korchinski, Frank Nazar, Sam Renzel, Ryan Green, Paul Ludwinski, Gavin Hayes, Samuel Savoie. A lot of different guys that I think could be NHL contributors, but especially players like Frank Nazar and Lucas Reichel, I think are going to lead the way and be a big part of this Blackhawks rebuild. Next up at number 16, right at the halfway mark of the NHL teams, I'm going to move on to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, to me, the prospect pool isn't quite reaching that top 10 territory, mostly because of Cole Sillinger graduating. That was a big one for me, and also Miroschnichenko does leave less depth now that he's on the NHL roster. But still, besides that, you got some great prospects like David Jiricek and Denton Mateychuk, who they got in this last draft. You got, of course, Kent Johnson, who I still consider as a prospect, who's only played 9 NHL games at this point. Carson Kuhlman, Stanislav Svozil in that conversation. And just in my opinion with the Blue Jackets, you got a lot of guys. Kirill Marchenko, I think, is another extremely underrated one. A lot of guys who will be NHL contributors, but I think Kent Johnson especially, out of the guys available still, is the best the Blue Jackets have to offer. Next up at number 15, we're going to go to another team that's gotten a lot in these past couple of drafts in the Arizona Coyotes. Now, I haven't loved every single pick that they made, but still overall the prospect pool is solid. Dylan Gunther, of course, in 2021, Josh Doan, Ilya Fedotov, Giannis Moser, who I guess technically isn't a prospect anymore, playing 43 games this last year. But of course, this last draft, Logan Cooley, Connor Geekie, Lambert, I think Julian Lutz's fantastic pick at 43. Overall, lots of depth, and I still think the Coyotes are not done whatsoever. They'll likely be in the top 10 after next year's draft, and could be even higher if a certain draft lottery goes their way. But with the Coyotes starting the top 15 picks, let's go on to number 14 and the 14th best prospect pool in the NHL, and the team that's risen just a little bit since January, and the Nashville Predators. Now, I still think they've kept a very solid prospect pool going. Philip Tomasino, again, is the big graduate over this last year, so that definitely makes it a little bit lesser so. But I still think over the last couple of drafts, they've done a great job of getting high-end guys. Joakim, Kemell, and Adam Ingrid, I think, are two really interesting picks in the 2022 draft. Fedor Svechkov, Lamoureux, and Olsen, I think, will also lead the way. Ryan Ufko took a big step this last year as well from the 2021 draft. You got, of course, Askarov in 2022. Luke Prokop is in the same draft. And even in the 2019 draft, going back all the way there, I still like Igor Afanasyev quite a bit. And to me, there's just a lot of depth in this prospect pool, but also you consider how good Askarov could be, how good guys like Kemell could be, and to me, I just like the potential and the depth that this Preds prospect pool provides. Now, let's go on to number 13, and go on to a team that, even though I thought had a pretty disappointing 2022 draft, still has among the best prospect pools in the league in the San Jose Sharks. Now, a big reason why is because nobody's truly really dominated and gotten to the NHL level and graduated yet. You still have Thomas Borderlow as a prospect. You still got Kanayev as a prospect. You still got other guys like Tristan Robbins, Izzy Weisblad, Brandon Coe, Daniel Gushin from that 2020 draft. When it comes to 2021, Eklund is still there and still the best prospect in the pool. You got Benjamin Gaudreau. You got other interesting picks like Evan Cardwell. And this last draft, even though I felt like they had a little bit lesser ceiling guys. Still, Philip Bystill will be an NHL player. I think Cameron Lunn will be an NHL player. Matthias Havlitz could push a lot of pace. And if Michael Fisher is able to unlock that offensive ceiling, there could be a really solid middle pairing guy there. So even though the Sharks, again, kind of were a little bit disappointing in the 2020 draft, their prospect pool overall is still fantastic. Now going on to number 12, and a team that also has risen just a little bit here in the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, if you get the 5th overall pick, your prospect pool should be better, and the Flyers are just that. Even though Cutter Gauthier wouldn't have been my pick, I can still see why the Flyers would go for him, and I think he's going to be the perfect Flyer that they want. I also love the Devin Kaplan pick at 69, like you guys know, but Samuel Tolomana in the 2021 draft was a solid one. Tyson Forster is making good progress alongside Emil Andre and Zayd Wisdom. Elliot Desnoyers is doing great as well, and overall you put into the fact that Bobby Brink hasn't graduated yet, and to me there's just a lot of solidness with this Flyers prospect pool. Again, nothing that's absolutely amazing, but a lot of depth and a lot of different playing styles too. Next up though, at number 11, I'm going to move on to the Ottawa Senators here, a team that has dropped quite a bit for me, but also they have had some graduates over the past couple of years, like Tim Stützle, like Alex Fermenton. Shane Pinto, I guess, is technically still in the prospect pool for me, but besides that, you got Jake Sanderson still there, Ridley Greek, who's still there, Jarventon, Clevin, who's still in the pool as well. You got Tyler Boucher, even though I didn't love the pick, he is in that prospect pool and still solid. Zach Ostiachuk, and then this last year, you got players like Thomas Hammer, who I like quite a bit. Philip Norberg could be this physical bottom pairing guy. I think for the Sens, there's some nice depth in almost every single position, and I think that's really what carries the prospect pool into this spot. But now let's go on to the top 10 and move on to the first team inside the top 10, and I am happy to report that my favorite team, the Dallas Stars, comes in at the 10th spot. And you know what you might be saying? You might be saying, oh, I'm biased. Well, let me just give you some schooling here, all right? Let's look at this Stars prospect pool. Just at center, Maverick Bourque, Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stankoven. You got other players as well, like Antonio Strages, who could fit into that role too. You got Thomas Harley. You got Artem Grushnikov. You got Artem Martino. You got Jack Barr, Connor Roulette. You got other players as well in this last draft, like Liam Bichelle and Christian Kyrou, who add to that defense that was pretty raw on the prospect side of things. Now you add some really legit NHL prospects there, and to me, there's just so much to like. I mean, Justin Ertl is an interesting one. Jack Barr could be something. Francesco Curry has taken some big steps over these past couple of years, and to me, this Dallas Stars prospect pool is legit. Whether you believe me or not, I think you should, because again, even the top end stuff like Wyatt Johnson, like Logan Stankoven, the best OHL player and the best WHL player this last year, the results speak for themselves. But now let's go on to number 9, and next up, I'm going to go to a team that was number 1 in my prospect pool rankings back in January, but just like the Colorado Avalanche, they did a good job of making sure that that did not last, and the Los Angeles Kings. Now, the thing is, of course, when it comes to the Kings, they were kind of in a weird position. At number 1, they were just hanging on to that spot, in my opinion, but they ended up getting rid of Brock Faber, who I thought was a big part of that defensive prospect pool in the Kevin Fiala trade, and of course, they got rid of their 19th overall pick, which, if they kept it and kept the same player, would have been Liam Ogren, which I think would have been huge for this prospect pool. Still, I think the 2020 draft with Jack Hughes was solid, but besides that, it was nothing amazing. But you still have great players like Brant Clark, like Francisco Pinelli, Samuel Hellenius. You got players like Helgi Grans and Kasper Simontoval, and a lot of guys like Martin Chromiak, who could be solid NHL players someday. But you also have had some graduates like Tobias Bjornfoot, like Arthur Kaliev, that have made this prospect pool just a little bit less. And also, of course, Dursey, who took this great next step this last year. And I think for the Kings prospect pool, what once was an amazing one, the best one, has gotten a lot more thin and has had a lot less depth stripped from it, whether it be from graduates or trades. Next up at number 8, I'm going to go into, my opinion, one of the most underrated prospect pools in the entire NHL, 10th in the last ranking, and number 8 here in the Winnipeg Jets. Now, their 2022 draft was awesome. McGrody at 14, Lambert at 30, Sally Monson at 55, Zilkin at 77, and it just feels like for the Jets, they just take a lot of these players that should go in the range and just hope for the best. I mean, Chaz Lucius at number 18 was a solid one. Cole Perfetti, I don't see as quite graduated yet, though he should be on the roster. Let's hope next season, only playing 18 games. That's a big reason why they are still so high. But Daniel Torgerson, you've got other players like Simone Lundmark, and just a lot of depth in this Jets prospect pool, and also some top-end guys. I mean, if Brad Lambert hits, he could be one of the best prospects in the 2022 draft, and you get that type of talent at number 30. Just a solid job these past couple of years, and I think they definitely deserve the number 8 spot. Now going on to number 7, though, let's go on to the Anaheim Ducks here. A team that I think is kind of in the same range as they were for last year. Of course, we've seen some graduates like Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras over the past couple of years. Mason McTavish hasn't quite taken that next step, which is why I see the Ducks as still one of the best prospect pools in the league. With McTavish, with Zolwiger, with Pasajov, this last draft with guys like Mintyukov. Even though I don't love the Gaucher pick, he will be an NHL player. And you add Warren and Luneau as well in that defense, and that could be something solid too. And to me, both on offense and defense, you have a lot. And you add as well Lucas Dostal on the goaltending side of things. And to me, it's a pretty complete and pretty solid prospect pool the whole way through. Next up, though, at number 6, and the final team outside of the top 5. Next up, I'm going to go to the team that always seems to be around this range in the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, the thing is, if you have a player up to the level of Seth Jarvis already graduating, you'd think that the Canes prospect pool would take this big next step back, but it didn't. For Seth Jarvis, he was 10th on my board, and of course, in the 2020 draft, or not for the short, what the heck? Why was it on Chicago? But next up, going to the number 6 spot and the last team outside the top 5. Let's go to the team that is always somehow in this position every single year in the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, you'd think with Seth Jarvis graduating as early as he did, this Canes prospect pool would take that next step back, but they really did not. I mean, for Seth Jarvis, who was ranked 10th on my board back in the 2020 draft, already making such an impact, by the way, I feel like the Canes prospect pool is in a position where they could have taken a step back and be fine with it, but this last draft saved them. Just Trigazov, Paravalov, Forsmark, you got Grudin in the 5th round, you got also Alexander Pelevin in the 7th round. A lot of solid drafts by the Carolina Hurricanes, but especially Trigazov and Grudin are absolute steals. In the 2021 draft, Morrow, Hamil Salmi, you got Koivunen in the 2nd round, you got Ian Reshek as a potential option, Bryce Montgomery. I mean, a lot of guys that could be roster players. First up, inside the top 5, and for the 5th best prospect pool in the NHL, I'm going to move on to the New Jersey Devils, who just stacked more on top of a solid prospect pool that they had already in the 2020 draft. I mean, obviously, Alexander Holtz hasn't taken that next step yet, so he's still considered a prospect. That is a pretty big thing. But you got, of course, Shakir in that 2020 draft. You still got players in the 2019 draft who were still coming in, like Graham Clark, like Nikita Hatiuk, and other players like Tice Thompson, who could be solid players, as well as Arseny Gritsyuk, and Patrick Monahan, who I still think are underrated prospects. Then, of course, in the 2021 draft, you got Luke Hughes. You got Chase Stillman, who was a reach in my opinion, but still could be a solid player. And in the 2022 draft, you got Simone Nemec, Seamus Casey, Tyler Brennan, Charlie Leddy in the 4th round, and just a lot of really solid possession guys coming up. But especially the defensive side of this prospect pool, just having Luke Hughes, Simone Nemec, and Seamus Casey, just that by itself, not even counting in Shakir into that conversation, this defensive side of the prospect for the Devils is absolutely stacked. And in terms of possession, in terms of just strength of skating, there's so much to love with almost all of these guys. Next up, though, at number 4, I'm going to move on to the team that I had as the 4th biggest winner in the 2022 draft in the Montreal Canadiens. Now, to me, the Canadiens were in an interesting spot. We could see them go up even to number 1. I still think the Habs did a great job, though, with what they've done in the past couple of drafts. Juraj Slafkovsky, of course, in the 2022 draft, just in general, I thought was fantastic. And the 2021 draft, I thought there were some great value picks, like Oliver Kapanen, Riley Kidney. You got other players like Joshua Waugh, who are already making that 150th overall pick look silly. And even back to the 2020 draft, Kanan Cooley is still a prospect. Jan Mysak, Luke Tuck. You got one of my favorites in Sean Farrell. And to me, there's just a lot to like there. You also got Matthias Norlinder still as a prospect, Jaden Struble. You got other just defensive prospects that just get the job done. And to me, there's just a lot of depth with this Habs prospect pool. Nothing that is amazing besides, I would say, Juraj Slafkovsky, but just a lot of guys both on forward and defense that'll get the job done. And again, this 2022 draft, you got guys like Machar, Beck, Hudson. You got Rower. You got Guindon. You got Torigny in the 7th round. Just a lot of good value and a solid start to, I guess, this Habs rebuild, if they want to call it that. But let's go on to number 3 and go into the top 3. And for me, these 3 teams are almost tied. The difference is razor thin. But at this 3rd spot, I'm going to go with the Detroit Red Wings. Now, some people might say they should be number 1, but to me, there's really 2 big problems with that. 1, Lucas Raymond is not a prospect anymore, and 2, Maurice Seider is not a prospect anymore, and you take out the best defenseman, and you take out the best forward in the prospect pool, and the fact that they're still top 3, in my opinion, is an absolute success for the Detroit Red Wings, and considering how good those 2 guys were in their rookie seasons, that is a success too, obviously. Now, you got Simone Edvinsson leading the way defensively now, alongside guys like William Wallander, who I like quite a bit, but besides that, you got Theodore Niederbach, Cross Hannes, who's a big part of that core, Donovan Sabranga, who's taken some some next steps. You got Emil Vira as a potential option. Of course, in the past couple of drafts, you got Robert Master Simone in the 2019 draft. And of course, in the 2022 draft, you got Marco Kasper, 8th overall, and a lot of forward prospects that could factor in, like Buchelnevich and Dylan James in that second round. So for me, the Red Wings still have one of the best prospect pools, but the fact that both Seider and Raymond graduated like they did leaves them just a smidge bit with a less depth. And still, overall, having a top 3 prospect pool without those guys is still a great thing in my opinion. But now let's go on to the top 2. And to me, at the second spot, you might not think that this team would be in the top 2, but for me personally, next up at number 2, I'm going to go with the Minnesota Wild. Now, to me, I am just in love with the Wild prospect pool in every single way. And you got to remember, of course, with the big Kevin Fiala trade, they added a big D of defensemen like Brock Faber, who I think is going to be such a great skating possession guy for them, on top of a great prospect pool already. I mean, Marco Rossi hasn't graduated yet, and even with Matt Boldy, I consider as a graduate, the Wild prospect pool is still so good in my opinion. We got, of course, back in that 2019 draft, players like Vladislav Firstov, Adam Beckman, who's still in the prospect pool, Hunter Jones could be something interesting, Marshall Warren. In the 2020 draft, Marco Rossi, who I still think is going to be great. He's been great in the AHL so far, and I think he could take this next step this next year. Marat Kuzadinov, Ryan O'Rourke, Damon Hunt, Pavel Novak. In the 2021 draft, Jesper Wallstedt, in my opinion, still the best goaltending prospect in the world. Carson Lambos, Jack Pierce. You got other players like Josh Pilar. And in the 2022 draft, Liam Ogren, Danila Yurov, Hunter Height, Survak Petrosky in the 6th round, which I thought was an absolute steal. And to me, this Wild team is building something amazing. Their cap situation might be screwed, but their prospect pool might be the thing that saves them in the end. But now let's go on to the number 1 spot, and again, the differences are razor thin, but let's go on to the best prospect pool in the NHL after the 2022 NHL draft. And as I was going through every team, it kind of struck me. The Buffalo Sabres have the best prospect pool in the entire NHL, and I was just going through all the last few drafts and just thinking, wow, I couldn't put anybody else at number 1. Just going to list some names off for you. Just in the 2022 draft, Matthew Savoie, Noah Ostlund, Yuri Kulech as a bang, bang, bang first round. Also, players like Tapias Nalinanen, Victor Nuchev, Mats Lindgren, Jake Richard, Linus Shojin in the 7th round. And to me, that 2022 draft was absolutely amazing and easily one of the best winners of that draft, on top of the drafts they've already had already. Owen Power, first overall, still in that prospect pool. Isaac Rosen, Prokhor Poltapov, Alexander Kisakov, Josh Bloom in that 3rd round. Olivier Nadeau, you got Tyler Kozak in that 7th round. In the 2020 draft, you got Jack Quinn, who's still a prospect. John Jason Peterka, who's still a prospect. Both of those guys killing the AHL as we speak, and will likely be graduates next year. And you go back to the 2019 draft, you just got Ryan Johnson, Eric Bertillo, who's a banging goalie prospect. And to me, just everything about this Sabres prospect pool has been so good, and it's been so collected since, I would say, that 2018 NHL draft. They've been building something special, and I think we're really going to see the fruits of that labor this next year with guys like Jack Quinn, hopefully John Jason Peterka stepping up in big roles, of course, Owen Power, but just in general, you factor in the defense, you factor in that offensive talent, and there is so much to like. And even in goaltending, Eric Bertillo, you got Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen still there. And of course, in this last draft, Tapias Lehtonen, who is, in my opinion, the best goalie prospect of the draft. And there's so much depth, there's so much star power, and so much talent with this Sabres future. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments down below, though, what did you agree and disagree with my rankings? Where do you think your favorite team should be in the top 32? Let me know if they should be higher, if they should be lower. Let me know your thoughts down below. And of course, let me know what your rankings would end up looking like. Who do you think has the best and the worst prospect pools? Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it to all the hockey fans guys know online so they can see where their prospect pool is at. And also click on this card for all of my prospect content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.